For all of you who have just are joining now, we're going to give it a minute so that people have a chance to log on. We have a large number of people registered for this, so we'll give it another minute or two. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Keeley. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Welcome to today's national call on coronavirus, housing, and homelessness. As always, today's call has low-income residents, people with lived experience with homelessness, homeless shelter and services providers, affordable housing providers and advocates, members of the media, staff from foundations, and others. As you all know, the moratoriums on evictions and federally backed rental housing have just expired, and expanded unemployment assistance expires this week. We're already seeing a wave of evictions that will become a tsunami if Congress does not act immediately to extend and expand the eviction moratoriums and to provide emergency rental assistance for those most in need. We're awaiting the release of the Republicans' plan for the next coronavirus relief package, when negotiations with Democratic leadership will begin. Just can't emphasize enough that it is absolutely essential that everyone on this call and that all advocates keep contacting their members of Congress about the urgent importance of passing a bill with $100 billion in emergency rental assistance, a national uniform eviction moratorium, more resources for homeless shelters and services, and more support for housing providers. Please do all you can to get this across the finish line. So we have a lot on our call, but we are very pleased to kick it off with joining us today, one of the Democratic leaders in the Senate, Senator Patty Murray from Washington State. Senator Murray is the ranking member of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and serves as a key member of the Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees funding for affordable housing programs at HUD. As assistant leader, she is a key part of the Senate Democratic leadership team. She has been a champion on issues related to homelessness and housing insecurity, and she helped secure the $12 billion in CARES Act to ensure housing stability in the early months. In response to the pandemic, she has led on legislation to provide resources so that schools can open safely, and a bill to ensure that when a vaccine is created, it is free to all and equitably distributed. She's been a vocal supporter about the need to address the pressing health disparities that have resulted in the deaths of far too many Black and brown people from the coronavirus. And we really appreciated her leadership as an original co-sponsor on the Emergency Rental Assistance Act to provide $100 billion in emergency rental assistance to help keep renters in their homes. So it is a great pleasure that I introduce Senator Murray. Senator Murray.
Well, Paul, thank you so much. Let me start off by extending my sincere gratitude to everyone on this call for the work you and your organizations are doing during this extremely difficult time. You've been so creative and proactive with your work on the front lines to stretch resources and staff in order to keep people and families housed during this pandemic. I am so inspired by your efforts to help the most vulnerable in our communities, and I want you to know I am focused on making sure the federal government does its part when it comes to addressing this current housing crisis. You know, from the beginning of this crisis, I have made it clear we need to do everything necessary to slow the spread of this virus, to protect public health, to provide care for the sick and support at-risk populations. And that includes prioritizing workers and students and families in our response efforts to make sure people have the resources and support they need to take care of themselves and stay healthy. And housing is an essential component of that response. My home state of Washington was already facing a severe housing and homelessness crisis before COVID-19 hit. And the pandemic has only exacerbated the urgency of the situation there and across the country, especially for Black families and other people of color who already face disadvantages because of our nation's long legacy of racial injustice. Over the past few months, I have talked to housing and homelessness providers across Washington state who are sounding the alarm for additional federal assistance in order to help keep people healthy and safe during this pandemic. They have told me organizations are stretched thin under the unprecedented surges in demand and increased operational costs for essential services like cleaning and remote work capabilities. And many of them have raised serious concerns about being able to help domestic violence survivors who are seeking shelter in greater and greater numbers. I've also heard heartbreaking stories from families who've lost their jobs and are anxiously trying to figure out how they're going to pay their August rent and keep themselves safe. And just this weekend, we saw the expiration of the federal eviction moratorium and the processing of the final expanded unemployment checks under the CARES Act. As reports indicate a wave of eviction filings underway across the country, I fear the dire and long-lasting consequences for those who lose their homes or apartments during this pandemic and economic recession, especially for people of color who are at a disproportionate risk of eviction and foreclosure. We've already seen that housing insecurity and homelessness puts people at greater risk when it comes to COVID-19. And so ensuring that individuals and families are able to keep a roof over their heads has to become one of our most important public health priorities during this pandemic. While the CARES Act provided a critical lifeline for many earlier this year, it was only a down payment for what ultimately needs to be a significant investment in housing and in rental assistance. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem Senate Republicans understand just how pressing and dire this situation is. The fact that my Republican colleagues dragged their feet for months when we could have been negotiating on the next COVID-19 relief package is absolutely shameful. The eviction moratorium deadline was not a surprise. We knew it was coming, and yet Republicans chose to spend months ignoring the problem and now have wasted even more time negotiating with themselves to try and reach a partisan deal they know has no path to be signed into law. Every additional hour Republicans have spent bickering amongst themselves is wasted time that we could have used instead working together on a real bill that could be signed into law. Families and communities are suffering, and they should not have to suffer more because of this Republican dysfunction. You can hear I'm angry and I'm frustrated about Republicans failing to understand the gravity of this moment, but I am looking forward to negotiations on the next relief package beginning soon, and I'm as committed as ever to fighting for essential housing assistance in our next bill. In that package, what I'm fighting for is $100 billion in rental assistance in addition to a uniform nationwide eviction moratorium and for a $75 billion in mortgage assistance and targeted foreclosure prevention. We also need to provide $700 million for housing counseling assistance grants, which would provide a critical service to communities in order to navigate the current economic recession. Hand in hand, those provisions will ensure people can stay in their homes throughout this pandemic while creating needed stability in the housing market. I am also pushing for an additional $11.5 billion for emergency solutions grants, an essential lifeline for people experiencing homelessness. To support a population uniquely at risk to COVID-19, the federal government has to provide the necessary resources for homeless service providers as they work to de-intensify shelters and establish hygiene centers and arrange non-congregate quarantine when it's needed, and help people transition into long-term permanent housing. Additionally, I am focused on making sure our public housing authorities who have stepped up to provide higher rent subsidies for those with lost or reduced income and to conduct frequent cleaning of their housing units get the assistance they need during this pandemic. PHAs should not face any kind of budget shortfall as a result of taking necessary actions to make sure their tenants are safe. We need to also look beyond short-term solutions and use this crisis as an opportunity to tackle the bigger challenges in access to affordable housing. I'm looking into ways we can do that, whether through incremental vouchers or increased investments in programs with proven track records like CDBG or Home or Section 4, or the needed expansion of the low-income housing tax credit program, to name just a few. And as the senior member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, I remain committed to keeping affordable housing front and center as we navigate the recovery. I'm also so proud of my Democratic colleagues in the House who passed housing relief legislation not once but twice in the last 2 months, and that Democrats in both chambers of Congress are pushing for a bold housing agenda for families and communities, one that meets this moment and works to address longstanding housing challenges. But as all of you on this call know, making sure that struggling families across the country get the assistance they need, it is not going to be easy. Besides the fact that my Republican colleagues in the Senate have neglected to include any housing assistance in their relief bills that they've proposed in the past, the Trump administration seems more focused on rolling back bedrock fair housing rules and allowing discrimination in shelters on the basis of gender identity than on ensuring that Americans are able to stay in their homes during this crisis. But that is where I look to all of you for help. And I urge you to reach out to your members of Congress, particularly Republican colleagues. It is critical we do everything we can to make sure Republicans understand just what is at stake for millions of families if we don't take this looming catastrophe seriously. Your organized and sustained pressure will be essential to getting substantive housing assistance included in this next relief package and addressing the housing crisis that already existed in many parts of our country before this pandemic began. And I want you to know you will always have a partner in me in the Senate, and I will continue fighting to get you and your organizations the assistance you need to support families and communities through this pandemic and to put forth long-term housing solutions. Because, you know, we all know the housing crisis in this country won't end with this pandemic, and we can't just go back to the way things were before it started. COVID-19 has really served to highlight the inequities in housing and how many people were already struggling with homelessness and housing insecurity before this pandemic ever began. We need to use this opportunity to come back better than before, and in order to do that, we need all of you to keep up the pressure. So thank you to the National Low Income Housing Coalition for the chance to join this call today, and thank you really for all your incredible hard work. No, please know, I'm thinking of you, your families, of your staff, of your clients, as we all do what we can to slow the spread of the virus and to keep our communities safe. So with that, Paul, let me turn it back over to you.
Senator Murray, thank you so much. I'm a little choked up. Every word you spoke is music to the ears of all the advocates on this phone, on this call, I'm sure. If you have a few minutes, we do have a few questions. I want to be respectful of your time. You have a few minutes to share with us?
I have time for a couple questions, I think.
Okay,
so go ahead.
Great. Well, as you just said, the Republicans have pushed off negotiations, and in the meantime, the eviction moratoriums have expired. And as I said at the top of this call, we're beginning to see a wave of evictions that really threatens to become a tsunami. And you had a great call to action there. Thank you so much for that. Do you have any other advice for the most effective way that advocates can be putting pressure on Congress at this late date with the need so urgent to enact emergency rental assistance?
It is so frustrating because that deadline was not a surprise. We knew it was coming, and yet Republicans spent months ignoring it, and then they wasted more time negotiating with themselves to try to get a partisan deal that really has no path of becoming law. And meanwhile, so many Americans are suffering. Everyone on this call knows we've got to get families the rental assistance they need to keep a roof over their head in the next relief bill. But we got to make sure that Senate Republicans understand that, which is where all of you and all the advocates across the country come in. What we need is for people to reach out to the elected officials who represent them, especially when they're Republicans, to make sure everyone who is part of these negotiations understands how serious this crisis is and how much worse it is going to be if we don't do anything, and what action needs to be taken now. And I highly suggest share stories from the ground and then hold Congress accountable to act. Your stories make a huge difference, so please share them with members of the Senate, especially Republicans, right now.
Thank you. We've been emphasizing that as well. Republican targets are so important right now. So second question is, as ranking member on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, you've been leading the way in pushing for the healthcare resources that we need to stop the spread of coronavirus. Of course, as you know, people experiencing homelessness are at far greater risk of severe illness and death from COVID because of underlying health conditions and because many are unable to practice social distancing when sleeping in encampments or shelters. Can you share a little more about why housing is healthcare and what does that mean for the next coronavirus package? And maybe what does it mean for the way we communicate with lawmakers?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, because one thing I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really made clear to all of us is how interconnected all of these policy areas are that some people often think of as being separate, especially housing and healthcare. Over the past few months, some of our best tools for reducing the spread of this disease have been telling people to stay home, keep your distance from others. But a lot of people in this country don't have that option. For example, without help from local government organizations where people are facing homelessness, how do they isolate or socially distance or stay, quote, home? So while we are working to reduce the number of cases and keep people healthy, one of the best ways we can do that is by keeping people housed, prevent them from being evicted. And the best way we can do that is by giving them rental and housing assistance that they need. And by the way, let me just quickly mention, as COVID-19 has had a disproportionate health impact on people of color, so too has the current housing crisis. As more than 40% of Black and Latinx renters report, they're unlikely to be able to make their next payment. So we've got to make sure we address housing in the next relief package. It is a healthcare issue, but it is also an equity issue, and specifically health equity issue as well. So make those arguments to your members of Congress.
Okay, Senator Murray, thank you so much. I want to be respectful of your time. I really appreciate these words of advice and a call to action, and we'll be doing everything that we can. And when I say we, I mean the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the thousands of people around the country who are advocating with us. So thank you again. Keep up the good fight, and we'll do all we can. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you. And again, everyone stay healthy and well, and know that we are fighting on behalf of you. With your help, this country is going to get better. So thank you.
Thank you again. Okay, we're going to move on with our agenda, and we are very pleased to have with us from HUD to address a little bit about the community development block grant for coronavirus program and guidance. And we have with us Janet Goldrick, acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grant Programs at HUD. And I believe she'll have a partner in crime, which is Jesse Combe, Director of the Office of Block Grant Assistance at HUD. After they make some remarks, I will invite our Senior Advisor for Regulatory Affairs at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, Ed Gramlich, to join us, because he's been tracking questions that we've been getting from around the country about HUD programs. And so I think that he'll join us and have some questions for you. I believe I'll turn it over to Janet. Are you there, Janet?
Yes, thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janet Goldrick. I'm the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grant Programs, and want to thank the National Low Income Housing Coalition for the opportunity for HUD to speak today at this meeting. In an earlier National Low Income Housing Coalition meeting early on in this event, Acting Assistant Secretary John Gibbs and Jesse Combe briefed you on the Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus Program, better known as CDBG-CV, and answered some of your questions. Today we'll give you an update and then talk a bit on the first in a series of CDBG frequently asked questions that we have just posted on HUD.gov. We have now allocated $3 billion of the total $5 billion that Congress allocated to us in March of this year. We continue to provide guidance and to technical assistance to grantees and stakeholders every single day. We have put documents on our website. We have had webinars, and we continue to do that outreach to all of you, I think, on this call and other stakeholders that are interested in our programs. More than $1 billion of the CDBG-CV is obligated and in grantees' hands and is being expended. We continue to look at their plans, the grantee plans, very expeditiously, and are turning them around in very quick order to ensure that this funding gets to the grantees, gets to the communities as quickly as possible. Some grantees, though, are waiting for our Federal Register notice to be published. We intend to do that in the very near future, but that is not required to do. You can go ahead and a grantee can issue their plan, have their hearings, submit their plan, and not have to wait for the Federal Register notice to be published. To support the program and hopefully its success, HUD has implemented a communication strategy to ensure that all of our stakeholders, external and internal, as well as within HUD, are kept well informed of our key program developments, get opportunities to ask us questions, and to bring issues to our attention. The strategy includes participating regularly in stakeholder webinars, working across HUD program offices, and also listening and working with other federal agencies that actually have funding in this space as well, and also a significant technical assistance effort to ensure that we are getting information out to all of our stakeholders as expeditiously and as efficiently as possible. We recently issued our first in a series of CDBG frequently asked questions, and I will turn it over now to Jesse, who will talk about those questions, and then we are open to the group's questions after that. So Jesse?
Hi, Jesse Hanforth-Combe. I'm glad to be with you guys again. I tried desperately not to be anybody's partner in crime. Take fairly
Sorry
serious,
about that.
trying to follow program rules. So we did post the frequently asked questions, which people are asking about. And well, let Janet know while I'm letting you know that we're in the last stages of doing the what we call Section 508 compliance, which is the disability compliance for the first of the duplication of benefits documents, and it should post today or early tomorrow morning. So we're very close on the first of the things that I think I got asked about the last time I was with you about duplication of benefits. And that'll give a guide to all the CARES Act programs, in a way that makes it easier to see potential overlap with CDBG, Community Development Block Grant. Okay, so I was asked to talk about our frequently asked questions that we posted. They are up on HUD.gov, and I think that maybe Ed can, or somebody can send around the link after this if you don't already have it. But it's officially dated, the questions that we had answered through July 10th, 2020, we grouped together in both the very, very basic questions like where do I find the CARES Act and when was it enacted? And where do I find CDBG requirements and how do I explain CDBG to people who don't know what it is? And contact information for grantees. Whether HUD has any ideas for how CDBG can help with pandemic response, prevention, or preparation, which as you recall is what the CDBG CV coronavirus funds can be used for, is coronavirus response, prevention, or preparation. And we did issue a guide, a quick guide on that, and there's a link to that. And there's also some duplication of benefits guidance starting at question 7 in the FAQ, which just gives you a definition of what duplication of benefits are. And we got a lot of questions from people saying, well, does this mean, does preventing duplication of benefits mean that if a grantee gives us funding from, say, the Treasury funds or something, if a state gives us that money, does that mean we can't take any ESG money or CDBG money? And that's not what it means. What it means is you can't pay for an unmet need twice. It's very important to figure out what your needs are. And once costs are fully covered, you can't keep adding funding if your costs and your needs are fully covered, which means you have to look to see what your costs and needs are. And it's basically a requirement that a grantee, and you'll see grantees who for CDBG are states and local governments and insular areas, they will be passing this requirement down to their subrecipients who can be nonprofits or other units of, smaller units of local government. And it'll say you have to have policies and procedures to check for this. And they themselves will be checking for this. So the FAQ gives you sort of a basic look at that without examples. The next TA product that we'll be bringing, that's under review now at HUD, will be coming with some examples of this. But, and we got a lot of questions about duplication of benefits analysis at project or activity level. And duplication of benefits is, it's possible to sort of do a partial version at a project level or a full version if it's just like a water and sewer project, for example, which is unlikely for CDBG CV, but possible. But if you are, for example, providing emergency rental payments with CDBG, you have to check each person. You can't do duplication of benefits analysis at the activity level. You have to come all the way through to the individual person. So we're providing clarification on that and how grantees can prevent duplications of benefits. And we'll be doing a lot more with this. We're coming with more TA tools and some webinars on this. And we are working very closely with our colleagues that run the Emergency Solutions Grant ESG program and the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS HOPWA programs. And also talking back and forth with the programs for the tribes so that we can speak with one voice on duplication of benefits. And I think you're going to find that we're very coordinated and speaking as clearly as you can with one accord. There's another section on the FAQs on program implementation that covers flexibilities available under the CARES Act, the suspension of the public service limitation, a clear answer is emergency rental assistance eligible under CDBG? It's eligible under both CDBG and CDBG CV. There are some limits, and this tells you that you have to be alert for duplication of benefits because there are other programs that can pay for this. And under the existing rules, the emergency payments can be made for up to 3 consecutive months to the provider, not to the family, but on behalf of an individual or family. So, and these eligible payments are eligible as a public service. So we've been asked a lot about whether you can go longer than 3 months, and we are starting to get that question even more now. And we've heard the questions, and there will be an answer coming, but it's not in these FAQs yet. Right now, the reg has not been, and the law have not been changed or suspended or waived. There were a lot of questions about whether or not, grantees are asking us a lot of questions about the urgent need national objective. And in CDBG, everything you fund has to meet one of 3 national objectives: prevention or elimination of slum and blight, meeting an urgent community development need, or with at least 70% of your funds, you have to meet the low and moderate income national objective. We are holding the line on the overall benefit requirement about the 70% needing to go to low mod, but urgent need is available, and we've put some clarification in the FAQs about it. It has almost never in the history of the program been used with public services. So there wasn't a lot of guidance in the 40-year history of the program that covered that. So we're wading in now into space where we're reading directly off the regulations as they exist, but answering questions that have literally, I mean, I've been with HUD for a long time, and I don't think I've seen questions on how to use public services with urgent need. But we are, and I think it's really important to emphasize, one of the only programs in the CARES Act that was aimed squarely at helping low and moderate income, principally for low and moderate income individuals and families. You know, that's written into our law, and we're taking that seriously. So we're holding the 70% line on the overall benefit. There are directions for how to add CDBG CV to grantees action plans and how to make submissions. We are expediting reviews through an extremely heavy workload period while we're virtual, but we're doing it. We had the FY 2020, federal fiscal year 2020 annual action plans coming in at the same time as all of the CARES Act amendments and plans, and we're moving them through as quickly as we can. And grantees have been really good about giving us complete submissions too. I mean, props to the amount of work they're doing. We are going to be publishing a Federal Register notice. It will provide additional waivers and some streamlining and alternative requirements. And it will just lay out all the CARES Act requirements in one place. There were questions about virtual hearings and when they have to do public hearings, because we're allowing virtual hearings on different platforms. That was a statutory addition under the CARES Act. What the CARES Act flexibilities apply to, questions regarding applicability to urban counties. We did extend the 2019 performance reporting submission. So grantees had a few more days to do that. We have not provided any additional relief from single audit requirements beyond what OMB already applied, but we described in the Q&A what that was. Things related to regular CDBG timeliness and electronic signatures. We got a bunch of questions about whether you could assist hospitals and clinics. And the answer is, again, yes, but sometimes it can be tricky to make a national objective. So it's very smart to fund an activity and not an organization with CDBG. It makes it much easier to understand what you're funding and not end up putting CDBG requirements across the whole hospital when all you meant to do was just house specific people who couldn't go home because they might have been contaminated and they don't want to spread COVID-19 to their families, and couldn't afford an alternative place to stay, which is a common activity we're seeing. So we're asking people to consult with their field offices on that. We're getting a lot of food bank questions and questions about national objectives. And we're going to be bringing some tools around that very soon. We do fund food bags routinely with CDBG, and yes, they are eligible for CDBG-CV. CDBG and CDBG-CV can also be used for FEMA cost share. And FEMA is doing a lot of emergency protective services, which probably isn't what you think it means. A lot of it is about, they've been helping with non-congregate care and homeless sheltering. And I think maybe some of you saw the emergency solutions grant guide on that. We're seeing a lot of use of our funds to help small businesses, both to help them retain jobs, but also helping the ones that want to start up or pivot to dealing with what people keep calling the new normal. There's been a lot of work around that. And then there's some very arcane questions that we answered, we've been answering on questions 31 and 32 about what grantee costs grantees can pay to subrecipients if people had to go on leave because of the grantee's closure or the subrecipient office closures in response to COVID-19. And we explain that, and you should, if this applies to you, you should take it and carry it to your financial person so they can explain and understand what it means. Every time I read it, I kind of look like rules on idle capacity. I need somebody to help explain that to me again. So please don't ask me to explain it. But the question and answer are there for people who can understand it. And that takes us through this first round of FAQs, the first 30. And so if you have questions, Janet and I'd be happy to swing at whatever you got.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Janet and Jesse. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to invite my partner in crime, NLIC's Senior Advisor for Regulatory Affairs, Ed Gramlich, to jump in here if he's available. We do have a question in the box, Ed, that I think is along the lines of a question you wanted to ask about arrears. Are you there, Ed?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, my picture's in the post office, most wanted. So Paul and I go way back, and even further back, Jesse and I think sometime in the early to mid 80s. I
think Jesse, it would be 87 in maybe June or July.
Wow, you really buttoned it down. Thank you. I thought it was earlier than that, but time flies when you're having fun. So Jesse, you actually answered a bunch of questions that I had teed up, so thank you. But one of the questions that I did have, and that is in the chat, was that advocates we're glad to see that first CDBG COVID-19 fact sheet. Many were hoping it would address whether and to what extent CDBG-CV could be used to pay for rental arrearages. So does the fact that the fact sheet is silent about that mean that it's not an eligible activity?
No. The problem with arrears is it's a very strongly case-dependent answer, and we haven't found like a crystal clear way of saying it yet. I think if arrearages clearly happened because of COVID, and the grantee can show that some way. They were after the public health emergency order, and that in your local area that maybe that restaurants and bars and major employers all closed. It's that some of the cases that we've been asked about were for arrearages that predated January. And the program are designed to just keep anybody from being out on the street. That's a really hard question for CDBG, current CDBG-CV. Can you pay, like arrears that someone has now in July that occurred since March? The answer is that it's probably an allowable cost, but we have some policy questions around that. Would want to make sure that the grantee is designing the program so that the person who is assisted doesn't immediately begin accruing arrears again when there's not a moratorium on. We want to make sure that the program is doing some good. And so there isn't a CDBG policy on arrears one way or another at this point. We're probably going to answer this question a case at a time, and we have a number of cases in front of us. But if you go to give an emergency payment to someone, because our eligible activity isn't rental assistance, it's an emergency payment to someone. And you want to pay their arrears on their rent or a mortgage as part of that in order to keep them in housing so they're not on the street, so it's more like homeless prevention. There are definitely ways that aren't all that difficult to design it to be an eligible activity. You have to keep an eye on that 3-month line. You can't go for more than 3 months worth. The utilities are tricky for a different reason. We've been asked about utilities a lot, Ed. And the problem is that a lot of utilities are publicly owned, so the grantee is essentially paying itself. And those kinds of activities, as you know, like a grantee can't buy land from itself using CDBG funds because there are other ways the grantee could have conveyed that property to the program. We have some questions about whether utilities need to charge the grant program. So utilities are a little problematic. Rent is probably the single easiest path.
So, Ed,
arrears are difficult for us. If you explicitly say you will follow the policy of another CPD program, we would definitely want to look at that, but I think that's a path we probably could be open to.
Jesse, thanks. I want to stress that I've gotten a lot of questions about that. So that's clearly been on a lot of people's minds.
Right.
And I understand the delicacy and the need for case-by-case consideration. But I guess rather than leave it up to the grantee to ask for that on a case-by-case basis, it would be really, I think, helpful for people in the field, non-grantees, the advocates, the legal services attorneys, renters themselves, if somehow or another you could express that in a future FAQ or something very soon, with all of the limitations and caveats that you articulated, but that makes it very widely available, makes all the grantees know that that option does exist if done carefully, and then helps the advocates then to press their grantees to actively consider that, because it's a big deal for a lot of people.
Well, the main thing to remember, Ed, and I hear you about that, and I think it is actually queued up in one of the coming FAQ documents. The big thing to remember is that for CDBG, this is a public service activity, so you have to articulate the public service. Is the public service just paying arrears, or is it preventing people from being on the street during a pandemic?
I think it's fairly clear that the latter is what everybody is concerned about.
But that's not what they're asking us. That's part of what makes it hard to answer, is we're having to redefine the question.
Well, so therefore it helps if in a future FAQ you define the question for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to do.
Because sometimes emails or whatnot are just not all that specific. So
right, and we're not a rental program. I've gone back and done research, and I'm sure you remember.
Yeah.
Many times you think we've answered questions about emergency rental assistance since we read it into the regs in 1995. It just doesn't come up. So this is another place where we're being used for something that CDBG can do it. Our flexibilities allow it. But unfortunately, the policy up till now has been pretty thin.
Yeah, because it's been fairly well hidden in the ineligible activities.
Yeah, it's in a double negative.
Yeah, right. So, but anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you heard my message there.
Yes, I did.
Hey, Ed?
Yeah.
I think given the time and other folks we still have on our agenda, we're going to have to wrap it up here. If Janet and Jesse, if you have time, if you're online with us, and you could stay on the call and see if there are actually a couple of other questions that have been submitted. Some have been answered by other participants, but if you and Ed could join you that way as well. If you can stay with us, that would be great, and you could provide some answers in the Q&A box or in the chat. Is that possible?
I can take a look at the Q&A and chat boxes and see if there's anything that I can answer. Otherwise, it would be great if you guys did what you did last time, which is send us the questions.
We will do that.
I mean, one of the ways we know things are frequently asked is because we collect all these questions people give us, and then if it gets asked a lot, we prioritize answering that sooner.
Fantastic.
Paul, I want to make one quick plea to Janet and Jesse. You kept talking about webinars and whatnot for stakeholders. Well, for those of the people on the call, those webinars have been, I guess, to the grantees, but a lot of people on this Zoominar, in addition to grantees, are advocates and just regular people in the community. And
right.
As you have more TA webinars and whatnot, please include all of us as stakeholders in one fashion or another.
Oh, absolutely. That's actually why we're here today. We're basically, if you invite us and ask us to talk about CDBG-CV, you know, and we had right after, you know, right in March before we even had an appropriation, or just as we did, we jumped on with the CDBG coalition. We convened them and had a call with them, and you know, we're trying to keep the lines as open as possible in a time when it's difficult to meet in person.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ed.
And once again, Janet and Jesse, I just want to thank you so much for joining us. As Ed said, you know, we had a series of questions that have been coming into us over the last number of weeks, and your explanation was so thorough. You answered many of them. There are, again, a couple of others that you might want to just take a look at if you're able to stay on the chat, but we really, really appreciate you taking the time and explaining some of this to everybody on the call.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we are going to turn now to our field updates, and I believe our first presenter is Eric Burmeister, who's the Executive Director of Polk County Housing Trust Fund. Eric, are you there?
Yes.
All
So
right.
thanks for the opportunity. May, do you have a slide that I would have sent over to you that might be helpful here? Thanks. So for everyone, Polk County Housing Trust Fund is the local housing trust fund for what amounts to the metropolitan Des Moines area. And so I can speak generally about Iowa and about how things are going in terms of getting resources for homeless prevention on the ground, but more specifically talk about Polk County. So you can see that at the time the state eviction moratorium ended, which would have been the last week of May, the Iowa Finance Authority and the governor took 20 million of the state's CARES Act funding and put it into a rental and mortgage assistance program that covered the entire state. That program has actually been up and running since the 1st of June. There has been about $1.5 million of that money that has been paid out or committed at this point for rental or mortgage assistance. The vast majority of it has been for rental assistance. There are some reasonably stringent guidelines on the use of that program. The biggest one being that the recipient must not be receiving the $600 a month federal unemployment bonus, and that the circumstances that give rise to the need must be directly COVID related. And so the program is being managed in-house by the Iowa Finance Authority with the help of the community action agencies. That particular program is available throughout the state of Iowa. In Polk County, you can see the various programs and the providers there and the rough amounts. I'll take you down to the CSBG at the bottom, that impact. That is not COVID related money. That was the allocation, actually the full allocation for 2020, and it has already been fully expended. So now Impact and Home Inc. Are working on dollars that have come through either the city of Des Moines as the entitlement jurisdiction and the Polk County Continuum of Care, or have come through the balance of state ESG allocation, a portion of which has been allocated to Polk County. We are currently waiting for August 3rd, which is the kickoff date. Both Home Inc. and Impact are I guess, taking waiting lists for people for application. And then finally, I will just say the Polk County Housing Trust Fund has created with its dollars a pool of rental assistance money that is for, I guess, the folks or households of last resort. So if our providers are unable to find any program that a household is eligible for, there is this pool of money that is available privately from the community that can be used in order to keep folks housed. I will mention one more thing because I think it's unique to Central Iowa. As everybody knows, the HUD dollars are reimbursement dollars. The Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines has set up a revolving loan fund for all of these providers so that as they advance the dollars to the clients, for the rental or mortgage assistance, they're able to draw down on this revolving loan fund prior to receiving reimbursement either from the city or the state. So that's where we are. That's where we are in Iowa right now.
Thank you so much, Eric. Appreciate that. One question is, of the 20 million, which is for both rental and mortgage assistance, is there a bifurcation that's spelled out, or is it sort of as applications come in? When I say bifurcation, I mean between rental and mortgage. Is there a dollar amount assigned to each, or is it just we're going to start using this and it'll be used as it's used? Some will be for mortgage assistance and some will be for rental assistance.
It's used as it's used. There is no cap on one or the other. Right now, as you might expect, the largest percentage of the dollars that have been pushed out through that program have been for rental assistance.
Okay, very good. Eric, I don't see any other questions just at the moment. Sometimes they come in a little bit later. If you're able to stay on the call and keep your eye out in the chat or the Q&A, that might be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Eric. Really appreciate that presentation. Okay, we're going to move now to our next field update. And with us is Howard Belodoff, the Associate Director of Idaho Legal Aid Services. Howard, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to be clear. I'm from Idaho, not Iowa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say Iowa? Sorry about that.
No, but everyone does that. We're in the Northwest, not the Midwest. So I was asked to present a little on a recent case that we filed here in Idaho that arose as a result of the pandemic and the financial situation that tenants found themselves in. And when, unlike many parts of the country, in many states and cities, the Idaho Supreme Court initially allowed summary eviction proceedings to continue, even though the courthouses were being closed, and really the courts were not set up to do online or Zoom hearings. And we all know that the CARES Act imposed a moratorium on federally related housing under certain circumstances. And our offices were also affected. People couldn't get in to see us. And we had a hard time representing people, of course. About a third of our cases involve housing issues. And Idaho's a fairly large state, very rural in places. I'm in Boise, the capital city, which is the largest metropolitan area in the state. But most of the counties and areas in Idaho are relatively small. And so it's difficult to get to people, and it's difficult to get information out to people. So we tried to respond to the fact that the court was allowing these eviction proceedings to occur by developing a plan where we could get online and get the calendars for all the eviction proceedings and where they were going to be heard and the judges. So we decided we would file motions to appear as amicus in these cases. So we filed a motion to appear, a motion to get online to observe the thing, and we filed briefs contending that the tenants would have a right to a jury trial. And the basis for that was that it was unclear, at least to us, how a landlord was going to prove that they didn't fall under the CARES Act moratorium, that they weren't federally funded in some way. And we didn't know how the courts were going to handle that. And so obviously most of the tenants are per se, and they don't know anything about this. And it was, I'm sure it was similar in other states. It was chaos. I mean, the courthouses were closed. People would be served a complaint and a summons and said, go to the courthouse at this time. And you couldn't get in the courthouse. And so I don't know how you would appear. So we were afraid that we're going to get a lot of default judgments. So we filed these motions trying to educate the judges as to the CARES Act requirements, that we felt that the plaintiffs, the landlords, had the burden of proof that the case couldn't proceed unless they showed that they were exempt from the CARES Act. And we felt that the tenants had a constitutional right under the Idaho Constitution to a jury trial. the statute for summary evictions said all these cases had to be heard without a jury in front of the judge. Like most states, I think ours is probably more restrictive than most, but these summary proceedings happen very quickly. 3-day notice. If you don't cure, you can file a complaint. You serve it. The court sets a hearing 5 to 12 days from the service of the complaint. The only issue is whether you paid the rent. In most cases, that's what happens. And we tried to kind of slow this whole thing down and make sure that people weren't unnecessarily evicted, obviously because we didn't need any more homeless people on the streets. There just wasn't going to be a way for these people to pay that rent if they'd lost their jobs. We had the problems with unemployment compensation not being processed. We still have the federal minimum wage here. We have a lot of low-income wage earners. They, of course, live paycheck to paycheck. We have some resources depending on where you live for rental assistance, but it takes more time to make a request and get approved for some of this rental assistance than it takes to evict somebody. So it's very difficult for people to defend this. So we got into court in this one hearing in which we got a client, an older gentleman, who actually asked for a jury trial, and the judge turned it down. But he reset the hearing because he was unsure of what to do. He's a fairly good judge. And so we were able to appear at the subsequent hearing, and by that time we had submitted our brief to him, and he said that the judge ruled that we did have a right to jury trial. Now, when we started winning these, of course, that gave us tremendous leverage to negotiate terms of when the tenant would leave, under what circumstances, and maybe even to stay and make up the money because they could get some funding. And so that was our strategy, but it's hit or miss. We learned, depending on the county, the rules were different, the procedures were different. Some judges wouldn't recognize that. So we filed a complaint in our state court here, in the trial court and the district court. The summary proceedings are held in our lower district court, the magistrates division. But we filed a complaint for declaratory judgment and an injunction, seeking a ruling that under the Idaho Constitution that the summary lawful eviction statutes were unconstitutional because they deprived a tenant of the right to jury. And the plaintiff in the case was actually Idaho Legal Aid Services. We couldn't seem to find a tenant who was in the midst of this. It just would happen so quickly where we could get a plaintiff, which created some problems, which I'll get to. But we filed that case. So basically it comes down to this, and this is true in a lot of states. Not all states deprive people of jury trials, we've learned in summary proceedings. But what we found was that actually was an Idaho Supreme Court case from the 70s that had kind of ruled on this and said there was a right to jury trial. But the legislature in I think it was 96, amended the unlawful detainer statute and said no right. It was interesting because when they amended it, they amended one section of the code, but there was another section of the code that said you did have a right to jury trial if there was a question of fact raised in the pleadings. So we had this contradiction in there. But that didn't really change the nature of our challenge, which was based on the fact that when Idaho became a state and the Constitution was adopted in 1889, that it preserved the right to jury trial as it existed in Idaho territorial laws as well as the common law. And in those days, 100 years ago or more, people had a right to jury. And common law, it was basically compared to common law ejectment. And so that was our claim, that was unconstitutional. And we ended up filing it against the state and making that argument. And one thing I would tell you is that there actually is a United States Supreme Court case on this. It arose out of the District of Columbia, a statute in District of Columbia, and I'm going to give you that. It's Parnell versus South Hall Realty, and it's 416 U.S. 363, and which basically ruled what we're arguing here, that under the Seventh Amendment and common law, that there was a right to jury trial for actions for possession. We argued that, we raised that issue. We said, gave them the legislative history, gave them the constitutional arguments, and to the judge, and we asked for an expedited hearing, so we got a hearing remotely. And the state defended it more on procedural grounds, lack of standing, justability, couldn't get a declaratory judgment, and the judge ended up ruling that there was a constitutional right. He ruled that we did have standing under the relaxed standing that the Idaho Supreme Court has adopted. We tried to get organizational standing and third-party standing, and he disagreed with us on that. Which the lesson of that is, if you can get an individual, that's probably better. Maybe there's a better organization out there that you can use as a plaintiff. But he ruled in our favor under the relaxed standing requirement, and he said that that it was unconstitutional. There was an interesting wrinkle to this case. In 2019, they started amending the statute to make it even more restrictive and regressive. And one of the legislators asked for an opinion of the Attorney General whether it was constitutional not to have a jury trial. And the Attorney General's office issued an opinion, which is obviously guidance, and not binding, which said it was unconstitutional. But the Attorney General was in court arguing that didn't matter anymore. The judge wasn't really buying that very much. So we had that, and the judge ruled that that if a tenant could show in a pleading that that there was a dispute in fact, then there was a right to jury trial. Well, as far as I'm concerned, anything that would be covered by the CARES Act moratorium is a question of fact. And therefore, you have a right to jury, and therefore, you can't get a summary proceeding. And now, just on Friday, the Idaho Supreme Court has put off jury trials to December. It was through October, but now it's December. So you really can't get one. Unless you want to wait till December. So it really gives us tremendous leverage to mediate and settle these cases, which is pretty much the best outcome, for people. We try to avoid any type of eviction record because that makes it more difficult. Like a lot of places, we have an extreme lack of affordable housing here, and it's only gotten worse, and we have a very low vacancy rate because people like to move here. And so it's very difficult for the lower income people to, at least in Ada County, Boise, to find places. And so we try to do the best we can to avoid them being homeless and give them some time to gather their belongings and find a new place that they can move into and maybe get their unemployment or rental assistance. And we do have now supplemental funding under the CARES Act that's being made available for rental assistance. I don't know how quickly it will get to people, and I don't know how. I think it's going to be a little bit restrictive in terms of who qualifies, but it definitely will help people. So I just had this morning a different judge email requesting for a copy of the decision. we're going to do a public education program because, you know, it's like any other jurisdiction. You know, the lower trial court, it's not going to affect another trial court 300 miles away. They're not going to be bound by that. And the court didn't give us, just gave us the declaration, didn't give us the injunction. We also asked for a change in the summons to inform people that they had a right to request a jury, as well as the Supreme Court has they have a pro se form that you can use in these types of actions, but it doesn't have a jury demand in it. We tried to get them to get that changed too, and the court, of course, was very hesitant to overrule the Supreme Court in that respect. So I think it definitely is going to have an effect. We'll see, since it's fairly new, it's just last week, we'll see what in fact happens around the state, but we think that's a good strategy to use to make sure that people aren't evicted when they have an eligible property under the CARES Act, and as well to get that leverage to negotiate, because we haven't had a single case where a landlord has not negotiated once that's been raised as an issue. So I think unless I have questions, that's all I have to say today.
Thank you very much, Howard. Really appreciate that. What a great strategy, and I think there will be interest. Somebody in the Q&A did say if you could share your legal argument and the state and federal cases that supported your argument, that would be great. If it's the kind of thing that you could share, if only just your email, that'd be great. We'll follow up with an email to everybody. If you can provide that to our staff in the follow-up email to this call, we'll share that. Thank you very much for the presentation.
That would be great. I think I gave Joey a copy of the court's decision, but it doesn't necessarily, I'm not sure that it cites that Supreme Court case, but there are cases all over. If you go to that Supreme Court case, in the last footnote actually gives some examples, and I know there are other cases that we found, at least at the time those cases were decided, where the Supreme Courts of those states have recognized, or the statutes recognize, a jury, right to jury.
Great. Well, any information you can share with Joey, we'll get out to the participants of this call. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Okay, we're going to move now to some congressional action on the next emergency spending bill updates. And we'll start with an update from Capitol Hill by Sarah Sadian, our VP for Public Policy here at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Sarah? Sarah, you might be on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
We're starting to see things move really quickly on the Hill with this coronavirus package, and so the next couple of weeks are likely to be a mad dash as we're working towards trying to get housing and homelessness resources in the package. So I'll start with the Democrats, since we've seen the least amount of changes on that side. So last week, Democrats were keeping up their pressure on their Republican colleagues. On Thursday, the day before the eviction moratorium expired, Senator Brown, Senator Warren, and others went to the Senate floor to ask for unanimous consent on two of their bills. One was Brown's emergency rental assistance bill, and the other was Warren's bill to expand the eviction moratorium. Senator Schumer also has been very vocal about the need for emergency rental assistance in interviews in the press. And so we're seeing more and more that Democrats are really holding together, very firm about what is needed in the next package. On the Republican side, things are a little bit in disarray. So last week, Republicans were supposed to start their negotiations with Democrats by releasing their counter proposal to the Democratic HEROES Act, but they were delayed in doing that because of disagreements among Republicans about how big the bill should be, about what should be included. Supposedly, they've been working over the weekend to try to get that ready, and the bill is or the outline of their proposal is supposed to be released later this afternoon, likely around 4 or 4:30. So we'll be paying very close attention to see what's in it. As of last week, we really weren't sure that anything would be included in the Republican proposal that would address the eviction crisis and tsunami that will be coming. But this weekend, we heard that a White House advisor was suggesting that the Republican proposal might include an extension of the eviction moratorium in the CARES Act. Now we're hearing that they're really backtracking that, and it's likely to only be a measure related to forbearance for homeowners. So it seems as though from what we know now, the Republican proposal will not include any resources or protections for renters and will not include any additional funding for people experiencing homelessness to help keep them safe from coronavirus. So it's obviously very disappointing to see that the Republicans aren't acting with urgency about this issue. But that doesn't mean that we won't be successful in getting something into a final deal. We're continuing to press them, and I think we're starting to see some changes behind the scenes among the Hill staff and among Republican senators who we know are weighing in with their leadership on these issues, even if it doesn't make it into the Republican proposal. So when this proposal comes out this afternoon, we'll be using it as an opportunity to push back on offices and to push Republicans to tell them that this is an inadequate and unacceptable plan. We hope that you will do the same too. It's really important that they know that their constituents are listening and watching when they roll out this proposal. And if they don't hear a lot of noise about why it's an insufficient proposal, they'll go along thinking that maybe this is okay, and it's not. So the only other thing I'll just mention is that it's very clear that the deep divisions within the Republican Party are making this process much more messy than it would otherwise be. But that also might mean that it's giving more political leverage to Democrats over a final bill. The more Republicans that are not willing to vote for a COVID package means that Republicans in the Senate will need even more votes from Senate Democrats. That puts our priorities in a better position to make it into the final bill, but we really can't take anything for granted. As I mentioned before, we have about 2 weeks to get this done before the Senate and the House go back on recess. There's no way that they're going to go on recess without passing a bill. They might push the date back a little bit, but there's a keen understanding that they have to get something done. That means these next 2 weeks are going to be incredibly important for you to be weighing in with your members of Congress. We'll know one way or the other after these 2 weeks whether or not we were successful. And I think we have a really good opportunity of getting these resources in a bill, but it really depends on all of our advocacy, all of us pushing in the same direction to make sure that we're letting members of Congress know what's needed in our community. So please keep up your advocacy and be in touch with us about the things that you're hearing from your members of Congress. And I'll turn it back over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Sarah. And that's a good segue because now we'll hear from Joey Lindstrom, Director of Field Organizing at NLIC, about needed advocacy. Take it away, Joey.
Hey, thanks, Paul. And I really want to echo a lot of what Sarah was saying and what Senator Murray was saying earlier, which is that the need for your advocacy remains quite urgent, and the window for doing so remains open. As we saw with the CARES Act, sometimes the process for finalizing these spending packages gets dragged out beyond what we might imagine or expect. And so there's definitely still time to set up meetings with staff for your members of Congress and emphasize the key needs for housing asks. And as you all know, we're prioritizing $100 billion for rental assistance of comprehensive nationwide eviction moratorium and $11.5 billion for emergency solutions grants funding for homeless service organizations to use. So these are our priorities, and they've been our priorities for this conversation for some time. We did have a very successful virtual lobby day last week. I want to sincerely and eagerly thank all of you who participated. We had lots of really effective meetings with the key Republican senators. And Sarah was saying earlier that we're seeing some progress with Republican Senate offices on a lot of our asks, and that they're indicating openness to both rental assistance in some offices and eviction moratoriums in other offices. And we're seeing some progress on that, and we're seeing more and more openness. This is the result of your advocacy, the meetings that you're scheduling, the emails that you're sending, the sign-on letters that you're circulating with other constituents, and making sure those communications get to the appropriate staff people. I can tell you without question that when there's a good constituent meeting with a particular office, that strengthens the work that Sarah and her team does on Capitol Hill and getting more traction from more staff. So please continue to schedule these meetings. Please continue to reach out to your members of Congress. We continue to have the Virtual Lobby Day page up on our website, even though Virtual Lobby Day was last week, because many of the tools, the template email to request a meeting, the quick resource for what our top asks are, the talking points on rental assistance, those are tools you should continue to use. So please take a look at that web space and look at those tools, look at those resources, look at those guides. I think you'll find that they are very helpful as we move forward. That's all I have, Paul.
Thank you, Joey. Now for some advice and resources related to communications, tools, and tactics. Lisa Marlowe, our Manager of Media Relations and Communications. Lisa. Lisa, I think you may be on mute.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Thanks, Paul. So White House Chief Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow is now backtracking on including an extension on the eviction moratorium. The Senate announced today that it would reduce the weekly unemployment benefits from $600 to $200. As Sarah just mentioned, this is not okay. We need commitments and urgency and specifics from the White House and Congress, and we need them to know that even if the moratorium is extended, it's not enough. A U.S. Census Bureau survey conducted from July 2nd to July 7th concluded that nearly 43.4 million Americans either missed last month's rent or mortgage payment or have little to no confidence that they can pay next month's rent or mortgage on time. 19 to 23 million people, about 1 in 5 renters in the U.S., are at risk of eviction by the end of September if Congress fails to extend both the federal ban and supplemental unemployment benefits. They have to do more, and we have to continue to let them know. As Joey just mentioned, even though the virtual lobby day was July 21st, virtual lobbying shouldn't stop. Continue to use the tools available at the Virtual Lobby Day Toolkit, which is available at nlic.org/Virtual Lobby Day 2020 to set up meetings with your senators and representatives. Thank those who have agreed to meet on social media. Continue to thank them on social media and through op-eds. And also don't be shy to call out publicly those who haven't responded to committing to a meeting. Continue to use the tools available at the NLIC social media toolkit, which is available at nlic.org/Rent Relief Now social media toolkit. Download and share posters that tell Congress why housing stability just can't wait, for them to make up their minds on the importance of unemployment benefits or how much people need to keep in their homes. Tell them that an extension of the moratoriums are good, but we need at least $100 billion in emergency rental assistance and additional funding for housing stability to keep us from going off a financial cliff once months of back rent is owed. You can follow the lead of our partners at Results, who have been able to publish almost 130 letters to the editors or op-eds over the last few months. Our state partners in New York, Ohio, Maine, just to name a few, have also been successful in publishing op-eds holding virtual lobby days with policymakers and sharing with those policymakers and reporters data from reports such as Out of Reach that call attention to the importance of including essential housing provisions and resources in any final relief package. So just to reiterate what Sarah and Joey just said, and everyone else who's on the call said, we're out of time. So don't let the need for these critical resources get overshadowed by politics and bureaucracy. Continue to flag reporters in Congress with stories of how consequential inaction is to real people. I believe Senator Murray also said this, that your stories are important. So we need to continue to push these stories and data out on social media using the hashtag #RentReliefNow. Share stories with your representatives by phone and through constituent email. Continue to schedule lobby visits, pitch op-eds to your local outlets, and consider self-publishing on blog sites like Medium and Tumblr. So again, don't let up. Use the tools that NLIC has provided. Also utilize your network and partnerships to keep pushing and keep up the pressure. So that's what I have there. Paul, sorry.
Thank you, Lisa. Great advice. Please follow that advice. Somebody did ask if Lisa could share some of what she just said to all the participants. We will get that back out to you when we do the update from this call. Please go and check out the social media toolkit, which also has a media toolkit in there for ways you can reach out to your media. Thanks to Lisa's great work and our CEO, Diane Yantel. NLIC was quoted, our research was quoted, or we were quoted directly in about 1,600 media stories just last week. And that's, what we all have to do is get the word out there, make sure the media is writing about this, and that they're using your quotes and your statistics and so forth. So please do all you can. As we wrap up, I want to invite everyone to please join NLIC's other working group calls. So we have a call on legislative action related to COVID-19 every Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a Working with FEMA working group call every other Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The next one is tomorrow, July 28th. Please go to our website and look at working groups, and you can find these and register for them. We have a state and local implementation working group Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we have a Tenant Talk Live working group for renters and resident leaders every other Monday at 6 p.m. The next will be on August 3rd, and it'll be on leveraging resident management councils with Keith Swiney. So please register for that if you're interested, particularly if you're a low-income renter or a resident leader. And then finally, just please keep up the advocacy. The time is now. Now we have to get this done. We can't wait. It's got to happen, and it's got to happen now. So please keep up your advocacy. Do everything you possibly can. Let's make this happen. Thank you so much for joining our call, and we'll talk to you again next Monday. Thanks, everybody.